It could take a decade until all the tower blocks owned by councils and housing associations are made safe following the Grenfell fire tragedy. That's the view of the National Housing Federation, which wants the next government to take a stronger lead on this. One housing association has found fire safety problems with every property it owns, and the cost for the whole sector is predicted to run into billions of pounds. It was discussed by experts at a housing conference in London called Homes UK. I met some of those experts, beginning with Brent O'Halloran from Hyde Housing Association. He told me about the work they've been carrying out.
We had to look at all of our high-rise buildings. It was 86 in the end that were over the 18-metre threshold. All of them have failed fire safety checks in some way or another.
How many of them have you had to replace the cladding on?
We've currently got 10 cladding replacement projects on the go. Only one had that ACM that's similar to Grenfell. As we started to remove the panels, we found all manner of sin behind, I suppose. A toolkit.
A whole toolkit left behind?
Yes. Lots of things we found. Old newspapers, builder sandwiches, the like, Others had combustible cladding, but it could be expanded polystyrene or high-pressure laminate or even timber. We took a piece of high-pressure laminate off, and on the back it says non-fireproof. And it's actually written on the product. What were they thinking when that was being put up?
High-pressure laminate, we've heard a fair bit about that, is perhaps in some instances as dangerous as the ACM cladding which was found on Grenfell Tower. But expanded polystyrene, we haven't heard so much about that.
It's a polystyrene slab, it's combustible material. That's one issue, but if it's not being fitted correctly, then that takes us into another dimension. It normally has a covering on the outside. The fire breaks that are meant to be behind the polystyrene slab are simply not effective in the event of a fire, so we've had to change it.
The work was carried out by the construction company Kier Services. Ian Bray is their commercial director. The government last December ruled that buildings over 18 metres must have the highest grade cladding on external walls, saying that it should be Euro Class A. But Ian Bray, even before then, regulations did say that combustible materials on external walls were not allowed. They should be of limited combustibility. How then did we get to this situation where we have so many buildings that patently have dangerous external cladding or insulation?
If you go back over that time, you have to look at obviously the specification and the requirements around it, requiring not only an aesthetic improvement to buildings, but also high levels of insulation to help with things like condensation and cold bridging. Highly insulated materials were a real sort of advantage, both in terms of cost effectiveness and also thermal conductivity. Coupled to that, there was a bit of a vagueness, I think, around the building regulations that were there, and ultimately poor workmanship as well.
What about costs?
I'm not sure that there's necessarily a parallel associated with that. I think, unfortunately, some of the materials that were used were, subsequently as proven, not fit for purpose.
With me now is Adrian Dobson from the Royal Institute of British Architects. It's been said here that a lot of the tower blocks where we've seen problems when they were put up or when they were refurbished, it was during the austerity years after the financial crash. How much of an impact do you think that's had?
We've had this drive to kind of lowest cost procurement. I think at the same time we've had quite a deregulatory drive as well, particularly in the public sector. There's been this very much drive to the lowest cost always wins. If you assume that the 4 or 5 people you've got in the final round of tendering are probably all in some way deemed suitable for the project, there's probably going to be little difference on some of the other aspects, and so cost ends up trumping everything. And the big worry is, what if that tender figure is actually an unsustainable tender figure, and that's when you worry that you get into this changing the specification, trying to squeeze every last penny out of the design, really.
Cost is something that has been referred to several times at this conference. I'm now with Andrew Gray, who's from an organisation called Fusion 21. They procure contracts for public sector organisations. So when somebody wants some work done, they will go out, put that contract out to the various developments and ask people to bid for it.
The pressure on public sector budgets,
has often led to a situation where they've accepted bids that are uneconomic to deliver, and sometimes with a view that then to try and reclaim the money during the course of the contract with variations to try and claw that money back.
Do you think that accounts for some of the things we've heard here? Panels that clearly said non-fire retardant.
When I started my housing career, the clerk of works on site was key. Often because of budget cuts, that role had stopped within organisations. And
most don't have one at all.
That's right. Trying to find the cost within the budget that the organisation had, they would often specify products that we now know are clearly unsafe.
Obviously, a lot of buildings were being built at that time, and some of those companies are no longer in existence. So we've had trouble looking to recovering costs for some of the works that we've carried out. To be honest, I recognise poor workmanship, regardless of the age of a building. We've got some buildings 50 years old, and the refurbishment work has been less than satisfactory. But changing the regime to move from compliance, as it traditionally is called, to building safety is going to take cultural change and systemic change.
Do you mean that in the past it's been more of a tick box exercise than anything else?
I think it's fair to say that we've been judged on our ability to ensure that X number of certificates are counted in. We need to look at that building in a holistic way so that we can really go, is that building safe?
Listening to that is Kate Henderson, who is the Chief Executive of the National Housing Federation, which represents social sector housing, all of the housing associations. Hyde saying that all 86 of their blocks failed safety tests and had to have work done. Do you think that that is what other associations are going to find?
We know there is a systemic failure of building regulations that isn't just around dangerous cladding, it's around how a fire can be contained. So this is really, really significant for the sector.
How long do you think it is going to take before all of our tower blocks have been checked and have been made safe?
It could take up to a decade, and it's going to cost billions of pounds. The scale of the challenge requires real strategic leadership from government. They need to coordinate, they need to provide clarity, they need to prioritise at a national scale what needs to be done first, and we need them to provide funding. We need a building safety fund that addresses these upfront costs.
The government has made £400 million available to the social housing sector for ACM-style cladding.
ACM cladding is only one part of the failure of the government's building safety regimes. We have been calling on government for the last 2.5 years since the appalling tragedy at Grenfell to take that strategic lead.
Isn't this really an issue for the developers, though, the people who were responsible for building these dangerous buildings in the first place?
As a sector of housing associations, we would procure, design, build, manage, own these buildings, assuming they were fully compliant, having had all of those checks and balances with our building safety regime. Only government can take a strategic lead on this. We're now finding products are not safe.
Kate Henderson from the National Housing Federation.